Welcome to the Content Matters podcast, where digital content and marketing pros talk shop. Tech may be changing fast, but great content is timeless. Get inside tips, trends, and practical know-how from the top minds in the digital content industry. Sponsored by Ingenix, the uniquely agile content management platform. Welcome back, everyone, to the Content Matters podcast, sponsored by Ingenix. My name is Barb. As you know, I'm your host, and I am happy to have with me today Alan Porter. Alan's the Director of Content Intelligence Strategy at A, and A is a consulting firm that does a lot of great work on content intelligence and content engineering. Alan he's an industry leading strategist, and he writes about content, he entertains us with content, and I know that he has done some regular conference speaking, especially with the Content Tech conference that they recently had, and he writes a lot about everything from content experience, content marketing, content strategy, and we're really happy to have him here today because he has a lot of great information to share with us. And he has a book called The Content Pool, and we're going to talk about that shortly. So thank you, Alan, very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, because content is everything important that everybody needs to know and understand. So I am excited to get started. So let's start with this first one that I saw this quote that you said that every content touch point is a brand experience and needs to be designed as such. Like, what does that mean for you, and what does that mean for the role of content and customer experience?
So it's my belief that really every time that you interact with a brand, it's pretty much driven by content. So if you think about it, if you go on a website, that's content. If you're on a mobile app, it's content. If you're in a physical store and looking at signage, it's content. If you're trying to order from the menu at Starbucks, it's, you're looking at content. Content is part of every single interaction pretty much that you have with a brand. If you see a video, if you see a print ad, a TV ad, a radio ad is audio, it's still content. Somebody still, wrote that and did the script for it. So, content, be that, text, audio, visual, whatever, drives, I believe, pretty much every single interaction you have with the product. If you think about using a software product, there's content on the user interface. If you're looking at I'm sat here right next to my printer, I'm looking at my printer, there's content on the little screen. There's content on the buttons, there's symbols and icons, but there's still content. So, pretty much everything that we do, every interaction that we have with a product, every interaction that we have with a company, is content driven. Even when you're on the phone with somebody on a help desk, you may be having a conversation, but they're probably accessing a knowledge base or a script that has content in it. So again, everything that we do comes down to content. And unfortunately, I think because content is dispersed across the organization, it's not necessarily seen as the driver of the customer experience, because it is sort of fractured across the organization. But I believe that content is the most important thing in driving customer experience. And in today's marketplace, where pretty much everything is a commodity, customer experience and brand loyalty is really the only differentiator left, and the only competitive advantage is to deliver really a good, seamless, engaging customer experience. And all those customer experiences, as I've just sort of pointed out, are driven by content. So I think those of us who are in the content industry and content professionals, it is down to us to promote the fact that content is at the heart of every customer experience, and every customer experience is an experience with the brand. If you think about it as yourself as a customer, when I'll just take Starbucks as an example. When you walk in the store and order, or whether you go online with the app on your mobile phone and order, or you go to the website to see what ingredient is in a particular drink, you're interacting with Starbucks. You don't go in thinking, oh, I'm interacting with the store, I'm interacting with the web people, I'm interacting with the menu people. Those are going to be different experiences to you. They're not. They're all a Starbucks experience, and they should be they should be the same. They should have the same content, give you the same answers, and the same feeling. So, you know, every time that you interact with content produced by a company, it is a reflection of that brand, and it should be a consistent message and a consistent experience.
Why do you think it's so hard for some companies to understand? Like, I mean, and even CX professionals, people who are, you know, that's their job, is to kind of to create these and think about how to create good customer experience. They don't always think of content specifically. Like, why do you think they kind of miss that?
I think it partly comes down to the fact that, as I said, and I've said this about writing in general across organizations as well, you know, because the fact that everybody writes, everybody produces content, it's not seen necessarily as a specialist skill. You know, not everybody's an accountant, not everybody's an engineer. So that's seen as something special and, you know, needs to be managed and organized as such. But because everybody writes and everybody produces content, it's not necessarily seen as special. So nobody necessarily sees it at a high level, sees it as a special skill that needs to be managed in a different way and organized in a different way and delivered in a different way, because everybody does it. And I think that's part of it's to the detriment as the content profession, but I actually also think it's the strength of the content profession that it is everywhere. And I think there's a lot of people who are producing really good content who don't see themselves as content professionals and, you know, maybe should. So, you know, I think it's the fact that everybody does it, so nobody manages it, is sort of at the crux of it. And it is not seen as the driver that it absolutely is. And I think that also comes down to the way that, you know, companies are organized internally. You know, they're organized around functional, vertical. We actually have a great visual that we use at A that shows, you know, the vertical parts of an organization. You know, you have marketing, you have finance, you know, you have engineering, you have, you know, the business, you have support, you know, and those are all vertical, if you like, functions within an organization. But to the point I was making about the Starbucks example, you know, you as a customer, we actually have a horizontal experience. We move, if you like, across those functions in a completely different way. But unfortunately, most organizations think of things from their own internal point of view outwards. It's like, this is how we're organized, this is how we will deliver our content, instead of thinking of it from the customer's point of view of, I've got all these multiple touch points and they need to align.
Right.
So it's that difference of, you know, the companies that get it are the ones who take that switch of mindset and start thinking about things from what's it like to deal with us from outside the organization, as opposed to, this is how we're organized, therefore this is how we're going to do business.
I was talking to someone the other day and about this inability for some organizations to kind of look at things from the customer's point of view, and it's just because they're just so self-absorbed in how they're run and how they're siloed and how they manage it, that they just can't kind of get out of that box or that mindset to really look at it holistically from the customer's experience with them. So it's interesting, like, and content, like you said, I agree, is spread across the organization. And so my question with that would be then, if that's the case, and you need to kind of get a more holistic view of the content so that the organization can approach the customer experience, you know, from one kind of perspective, what are the things that they might need to do, or what are the challenges, other than the fact that they are siloed, that would keep them from being able to do that?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. What sort of keeps them from doing it? In a lot of cases, it's actually the way that they're measured. You know, what their key performance indicators are, or how that, you know, how they're incented. You know, I'm gonna pick on the cable TV companies here, but you know, people on the phones on the table and a bit to the cell phone companies, they're incented to sign up new customers. They're not incented to keep new customers. You know, I've done it. I cut the cable recently, and I called up my cable company and said, I'm canceling my contract. And they just went, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Not why. What can I do for you? What can I do to retain you as a customer? It was just, okay, because they're not incented to keep me. If I called up and said, I'm thinking of signing up, they would have said, oh, we've got all these great offers and blah, blah, blah. Because that's the way they're incented. So, it's a sale, forget about the customer. Make a sale, forget about the customer. There are other ways. I was talking to a company recently, and they were telling me that they were measured by the way they contained the customer, and the way that they defined contain was if somebody went to a help page on their website, looked at it, but didn't go anywhere else and didn't pick up the phone to call customer support, they'd contain that they measured that as a success. And I said to them, well, that doesn't mean your content's good. It could be somebody read the content on that web page and it didn't answer their question, and they're just so damn frustrated they just left the web page and decided to go somewhere else.
Right.
And they were like, oh, yeah. They were making an assumption that their content was good just on the basis that somebody didn't make a follow-on action. That doesn't mean your content's good. Right. And that doesn't mean it's a good customer experience. It just means somebody looked at your webpage. That tells you absolutely nothing about the customer experience, but that's how they were measured. So therefore, there was no incentive for them to dig deeper to find out if they were actually solving their customers' problems. So, I think a lot of it comes down to the management KPIs and the way people are incented, the way they're measured. And also, we all do it. We get heads down into what have I got to do today to do my job. I have to do this thing and deliver it and pass it to the next person in the line or push it onto the next system or whatever. And we all sort of, we all become, and it's human nature, we all become myopic about what we have to do. And it needs somebody to be able to take that step back who has the view maybe across the organization to start looking at things from a customer perspective and bringing those people together. And one of the things I do when I run training classes around this, is I ask people, what's a really good customer experience for you? And, they'll throw out names like, Netflix and Disney and, and other ones. And I'm like, well, why do you deliver that sort of experience to your customers? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, you don't stop being a customer when you go to work. You're still somebody else's customer. Why aren't you bringing that mindset to the way that you deliver the experience to your customers? Don't expect your customers to have a lesser experience than you'd accept as a consumer yourself. So it sort of comes down to that. So, I think what the barriers are, a lot of them is just, functional, siloed, the way that, we're measured, the way people think about what they're doing. And getting around it really just, that's the hardest part. I mean, the hardest part of this is the people part, is the change management part, is taking that different mindset, thinking about what you'd accept and applying it to the way that you're delivering for your company, and asking questions and pushing back. Why are we doing this? Why does a customer have to give their account number 4 different times every time that they, speak to a different representative or encounter a different system? Why isn't this piece of information flowing from this system to this system? Is just be annoying and start asking the questions and building those bridges. And to start with, they could just be verbal network bridges of just getting 2 people to go, oh yeah, maybe that should talk to that. And then the system stuff, just throwing systems in there doesn't work. You have to sort of build in that mindset.
Right.
And that takes time. I know that's not nobody's going to walk in on Monday, flick a switch and completely change the culture of a company. It takes time. No.
And the technology that underlies the ability to do that, does that also take time to implement as well?
It does, but it needs to, I don't know, you're a technology company. I totally understand that. But, to my mind, it's people, process, and then technology. You have to have the mindset. You have to think through the process, and then you apply the technology to the process. The worst thing you can do is bring in technology and just and build the process around a specific piece of technology. That's where you end up with the siloed systems where the content, data and content doesn't flow from one to the other.
So. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. I don't believe that technology should be the first thing you do ever.
Unfortunately, it's the easiest thing to get budget for.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
It's an easier sell to go up to, the C-suite and say, we need magic tool XYZ, and it's going to it's going to cost X number of dollars, and figure out, what's the ROI on content. That's hard math. It's an easier math to go and say we need a piece of technology to do X. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so in terms of content, then, There are two groups. Well, there's lots of groups that create content, like you say, but
Yep.
you've worked in both product and content marketing, both of which produce a ton of content for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the job postings for them. The list of, as far as I'm concerned, the list of capabilities overlaps greatly, but they're
Yep.
treated as very separate disciplines. Like, how do you think the relationship between those two groups should really be managed?
Really, they should be they should be really synergistic. Oh, that's early in the morning, and I've only had one cup of coffee. That's not bad. They really should be, even if they're functionally separate, they should be synergistic. They should work together. Ideally, I've seen organizations where content marketing reports to product marketing. I've seen organizations where product marketing reports to content marketing. Where I seem to see the most benefit is where sort of both fall within the purview of somebody like a chief marketing officer, or, somebody who even is the chief product and marketing officer, somebody who has that purview over both. But ideally, they should at least have a close functional relationship, even if they're not directly in the same organization. And again, I think it comes down to just building a lot of those bridges, being aware of what each of them's doing and coordinating. And that comes down to, when it comes to doing a product release and product marketing, making sure content marketing is in the mix from sort of early in the process. It's not, it's not an afterthought. The same with technical documentation shouldn't be an afterthought. Actually, technical documentation is the most powerful content marketing asset you have. It's again, and this is very glib and easy for me to say, but I've worked within large organizations where it's, this is a difficult thing to achieve, but you can do it through relationships. You can do it through good communications. You can do it by just making people aware of what it is that you do and how that relates to what they do, and pulling them together. So,
one of the things that I find interesting is that both groups seem to be responsible for defining kind of customer personas and creating customer journeys. But that doesn't make sense because they're off doing separately different things. But it's the same customer. Like, how do you bridge that gap?
That's a very interesting question. I have, with customer journeys, again, you have to be sort of define what you mean by a customer journey from an organizational point of view, because I tend to find with some companies, they think customer journey applies to once somebody has arrived at your website or has clicked on your Facebook page, where do they click and where do they move through your content? I actually see customer journey as a much broader thing. It's actually what is your customer's job? What's the thing that they do on a day-to-day basis? What do they do when they get in at 8 a.m. and leave at 4 or 5 in the evening? What's the stuff they do in between? And at what point in that do they need to interact with you? And figuring that out, what it is that they're trying to achieve, to make their job easier. Are they looking for answers? Are they looking to do a transaction? Those tend to be the two things that people interact with companies for. What are the questions they're asking? What's the transaction they're trying to do? How do they do it? What outcomes does your customer want to make his job easier? And then figure out where you fit within that overall story framework. So for me, that's what a customer journey means. And that really needs to come and be done again at a sort of a higher level. Again, unfortunately, we tend to hand to things, to your point, that things happen functionally. Content marketing is like, let's do a customer journey, around the website, and product marketing can be, let's do a content journey around how somebody actually uses the product, and the two don't necessarily talk to each other.
Right.
So it really needs to, again, take that broader, sort of more holistic point of view. And unfortunately, some of that, has to come from above, or if there isn't the willingness to do that from above, again, it's just making sure that, if we're going to start, if we're asked to do a customer journey, ask around, has anybody else in the company already done one? And if so, what was their definition and parameters, and what results did they get, rather than just blindly going out and doing it. Same with, we need somebody to create a white paper on X, Y, and Z. Well, has somebody already in the company done any work around that? Can we go find it? And I know finding content around an organization, particularly very large organizations, can be difficult, but it's amazing how far you can get just by asking questions.
A quick pause to say thank you to Ingenix, the Content Matters sponsor. Ingenix is a leading provider of agile content management solutions. You can check them out at ingenix.com. You need someone to kind of help create those relationships across the company to figure out who knows what and who has what expertise to, or who's created what content that you can take advantage of. And one of the things that you had said in an article is that you thought technical communicators are the best people or persons that can drive those kind of relationships to share that content and share that knowledge. Why do you think they're the right person for the job?
Well, I've always felt that and been fairly strident about the fact that technical communications or technical documentation, information architecture, whatever, information design, whatever you want to call it, that point where you're building building the content to help the customer use the product, that's where all the intellectual property of the company comes together. If you think about it, they have, they're working with the engineers, working with the support people. They're the, a good technical communicator should be the customer advocate. They're the ones, who should be thinking, how to communicate something to a customer effectively. You have to think like the customer. So they should already have that outside in view of what's it like to work with our product and what do I need to explain. So they already should have that mindset. To be an effective technical communicator. And as I said, they're pulling together information from engineers. They're often the, if you like, the translator between the engineer, or the bridge between the engineer and the product people and the customer. They probably should be working with support. Ideally, they should be working with marketing too, to make sure that they're telling the same message. They should be working with the training. If you've got training, they should be working with the training people. So to make sure that the training, the information in training matches the information in the manuals or the documentation or the online help or whatever. So, really good, effective technical communicators should already be working with people across the organization to pull together the content that they need to do their job. So, and that's where everything comes together to be, from an intellectual property point of view, to be delivered to the customer. So, yeah, I've always held the fact that technical communications is the key point in the organization where that IP comes together.
Do some companies, or is there kind of some degree of a mindset, I guess, that a technical communicator can't really communicate in the language of the customer, but they're much more, technically, their content is too kind of hard to understand because it comes from a more technical background? Like, I know that doesn't really make sense, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, a good technical communicator's job is to take the complex and explain it in a way that other people can easily understand it and use it. I mean, that's what it shouldn't be too technical if they're doing their job right.
Right.
I think that's partly why some people don't like the word technical in the job title anymore, and because it sort of sets up an implied level of complexity that isn't probably necessarily there.
Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I actually also think the biggest issue is that technical communications, if you like, documentation, has just traditionally been seen as a necessary evil and overhead.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, it's always been, I've run technical publications departments, including one at a major aerospace manufacturer, where I was asked why I needed so many people and couldn't my secretary write the manuals. To which my response was, do you want to get on a plane where it's been maintained by manuals written by his secretary? And the executive quickly changed his mind.
Yeah.
But there's that sort of mindset. Well, it's just producing, books and manuals that nobody's ever going to read. So, but as I say, if you think about it, that's where everything comes together. And people have done research, that a lot of companies are finding that people are coming to their websites, as much as 70 to 80% of the time, they're looking for that technical documentation before they make a buying decision. They want to read about the product. So it has really become an essential part of product marketing. So, and I've sort of gone off the line and I've forgotten your original question.
No, you answered it. And that's kind of interesting because a lot of product-based websites that I've seen do not give you that kind of information. It's much more high level. And if you are a person who wants to do a lot of the research upfront yourself, which is what most people who are purchasing now do, they don't want to talk to sales to get kind of all the details of how a product works. But websites aren't necessarily providing that kind of information. They are still trying to push you to talk to sales first.
Yeah, and the general pushback you get about put your technical documentation online is, oh, well, our competitors all get it and they'll
Right.
be able to read it. If you've got serious competitors, they've already got your product. They've probably got an instance or a copy of your product, and they've probably already got your manuals, and be they print manuals or whatever.
Yeah.
I've done that job where I've gone out and done the research. It's not that difficult to find the technical information that you need for a competitive product.
Right.
So isn't it better that your customers your potential customers can get answers to the questions you want? It reduces the sales cycle. You get a more educated customer. And you actually get great feedback on your documentation from, because people start asking questions. I don't quite understand this. I don't quite understand that. So, I always see it as a win-win. So
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your book, The Content Pool.
Sure.
It makes an interesting case, and I haven't read it, but I think I added it to my wish list, which has a ton of books on it right now. It talks about, making the case for the creation of content and the management and distribution of it being a core strategic business activity. And that's kind of similar, when I was looking at that, to Doug Laney's kind of discussion of infonomics and how we can put a value on our content and we need to treat it as much more of an important thing in the company. And but you wrote that book in 2012, but we're still not there yet. They seem to be still high level ideas that are important, but we're just not that far along yet. Is that what you're finding?
I'm finding there's a move in that direction. It's slow. Particularly larger companies take time to move. My basic premise is every company, doesn't matter whether you're a mega corporation or two people in a garage in San Jose coming up with the next thing after Twitter. Or even a one-man consulting company, you all do the same thing. You create. You see the need for a product or service and create it. Nobody's going to buy it unless you tell people about it. So you have marketing. You have to tell people. You want to sell it, so you have a sales function. Ideally, you want to collect money for it. So you've probably got a finance function, and then you're going to support it and support the customer. So across those five things, what are you doing? What's common across all those five things is you're creating content as you do each of those five things. Content, as I said, is the one thing that binds a company together. Content is where a company's knowledge and worth is in the content they produce, doing those other five things. Those other five things all tend to have very senior executives in charge of them. Content does not. And I believe content is the largest unused asset in most businesses. And the book actually ends with the idea that every company should have a chief content officer who actually understands content holistically across the organization and how it flows and what it powers and stuff. That's sort of my dream scenario. I would say in the years since I've written the book, I've come across a few organizations that actually do have chief content officers. What I'm seeing is engaging with a lot of clients over the last several years is the realization that content is becoming more important. There may not be a lot of chief content officers out there, but I'm seeing more people at sort of a vice president type level or a senior director of content, or people with the word content in their title who actually have responsibility, if not for content, across the whole organization. Maybe they have responsibility for content, say, across the whole of marketing or the whole of support or something. So starting to see a rise in the awareness of the importance of content. Still got a long way to go, but it's definitely moving in the right direction. I do firmly believe that we will get to the point at some point where, it may not be for another 5, 10 or 15 years or whatever, but we will start seeing companies put content as an asset on the balance sheet. If you think about movie companies and publishers, their IP is content. They have content on their balance sheets, and that's and I think that we used to say that every company is a publisher. I think these days every company is a multimedia production company, and I think we will start getting to that point where valuable content assets actually start being seen as that and actually have value attached to them and have visibility on the balance sheet. I don't think it's going to happen in the next couple of years, but I think it's definitely moving in slowly in that direction.
And I think that's where you'd see content operations as companies start to build real content operations strategies, that we'll start to see that kind of show up more and more, right?
Yeah, and that's actually another job title I'm starting to see a lot more of is, directors of content operations or content operation managers, or people actually thinking about content operations beyond just, authoring the manuals. They're starting to see, how can we actually pull content together and reuse it across the organization? Yeah.
Okay. So you've written non-fiction books, but you've also written high adventure fiction, pulp culture reference books, and comic books. I saw one that you did that was Star Trek related. My son would just love you. We would probably die to talk to you. How did you get started in writing that kind of fiction, and what's your favorite stuff to write about?
Ooh, that's how did I get started writing fiction? That's actually good. I've always wanted to write from being very young, but I didn't actually really start writing seriously till I was in my 30s. I just always liked to tell stories and wanted to tell stories. I really started more on the nonfiction pop culture reference books. I'm a self-declared geek. There's a lot of things I love: Star Trek, James Bond, Batman, Sherlock Holmes, just looking around my office, full of geeky stuff, and like they say, often your first book becomes when, you're looking for a particular book on the market that doesn't exist. So you go write it yourself. And that's sort of how I got into it, with a couple of the reference books I wrote. And I still do a lot of pop culture essay writing for various pop culture sort of anthologies and things like that. So still deeply into that. But from that, just started with a couple of short stories, pitched them to a few publishers, and eventually, started to make some sales. And over the last few years, it's got pretty consistent, where I'm sort of doing, at any given time, I've usually got a pop culture reference book project on the go, plus writing short stories and novellas.
How do you do it all? How do you work a full-time job and another full-time job is what it sounds like, which I would love to do as well. So,
well, my actual answer to that is, believe it or not, I'm writing a book on that.
That one I will read.
Yeah. And the irony is I've actually already missed my deadline, and I'm late because there's too many other things going on, which is pretty ironic, but I am still working on it. So, yes, but I am actually working on a book about that, which is called Ditch the List. I do not like to-do lists. I think they're... I stopped using them many years ago and found myself more productive when I got rid of having a to-do list. So that's the title of the book, is called Ditch the List. But yes, what prompted it was people keep asking me that question: how do you find time to do it all? So yeah.
And do you find synergies doing like writing fiction with your content intelligence work? Like, is there and vice versa? Like, is there things that kind of cross over for you?
Oh, very much so. I started out as a technical writer, and been, continue to be involved in technical communications profession. And when it started to come into write fiction, I'm one of those who very much plots out my fiction a bit like putting together the sections for a technical manual, where you sort of figure out the structure and then you go back in and fill in the details. I very much, that's the way I approach my fiction, very much so. Is I up front, I know what the theme of the story is going to be, and then I'll sort of plan it out, what the main story beats are, and then sort of go back in and just sort of gradually fill it out, and then sort of go back and make sure it flows okay. So I'm very much so. On the converse of that is the fact that because I sort of am involved in storytelling, and sort of that goes, is pretty much forefront of my mind. I do like to communicate through stories, and the content, and talking to content intelligence. The best way really often to get people to understand what's happening is to tell stories. People remember stories more than they remember facts. So dry facts can be okay, but the things that people actually relate to and engage with. And we'll remember is if you can spin a story around it, if you can put examples around it. So yeah, I like to think of myself as a storyteller first and foremost, whether that's actually in the fiction world or whether that's in if you like, the day job of talking and educating people around intelligent content. It's still storytelling.
So. I think I love it. I think that's just such a great way to think of things. Definitely.
Yeah.
So final question, where do you see the CMS industry in 5 to 10 years? Will we have resolved our issues with creating useful, reusable content? Will the technology be better and help us get there faster? What do you think?
That's a great question, because I worked for a couple of CMS vendors over the years. I think the underlying technology and the fundamental theory is there. I think it's great. I think that the hardest part and the biggest challenge we face it comes down to that storytelling. It is really selling the benefit of it. It is amazing. The most used content management system in most environments that we engage in from a consulting point of view is Microsoft Word as email attachments. Unfortunately. Because it's quick and it's easy and people don't have to think about how they use it. And if you start throwing, XML at people, it can be scary. It looks complex. They don't want to use it. Just to give an example, I introduced an XML when I was running a content marketing technology team at one place I worked. We introduced an XML-based CMS for marketing content, and the marketing people were like, when they saw the interface and you've got to tag this and tag that and break this up and break this down, they were like, we're never going to use that. We don't want anything to do with it. So we sort of took a couple of weeks off. We put a nice new user interface on the front of it, which just made it look like a form, and they never saw XML. They didn't have to know anything about tags, and It was exactly the same things singing in the background, and we gave it to them. We're like, oh, this is perfect. This is great. We'll use this. Better than that other system. It was the exact same system. We just put a different front end on it. But it hid all the technology. It hid all the stuff in the background. I think to an extent, and I've done this and I'm completely guilty of it. We get so carried away in the CMS environment about what we can do and the way we do it, that we tell the wrong story. We talk about features. We talk about features and functions and XML and reuse and data and content models and stuff like that. And people's eyes glaze over. It's like, we can never do that. We're not sophisticated. A phrase I hear a lot: we're not sophisticated enough to do intelligent content. That's not right. You don't necessarily have to be sophisticated. You just have to think about a different way of doing it, understand the benefits to yourself and your customers, not from a features and functions point of view, but what does it mean to you as a business? What does it mean to you as your customer? How can you deliver a better customer experience? Take another look at your content and the way that you're producing it from a different mindset. That's intelligent content. That's not technology. I think we have the underlying technology. I think, what we have to get a lot better at is telling our story, and figuring out how we can actually make that relatable to the people who are creating the content, managing it and delivering it in a way that it doesn't frighten them, that we're trying to make the machinery too complex.
Think about the customer's perspective.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. This was really interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Bob. It was a good, fun conversation to kick off a day. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening. On behalf of our sponsor, Ingenix, I want to thank you, welcome you to come back and join us again. You can catch our podcast summaries on the Ingenix website, and when the podcast goes live on Anchor and Apple Podcasts, we'll make sure to let you know. And until then, we'll see you next time.